So you've been in Yemen, Cambodia, Colombia, Haiti, probably 1,000 other places, and you just did a story on Boko Haram.
Did.
Right?
Yep.
So first part came out yesterday, second part's coming out today. So what'd you do on Boko Haram? That's crazy.
So it's a 3-part series. The full length will actually be released on Monday, and I essentially went there to look at and to observe and to see the Nigerian government's major offensive against Boko Haram. Problem that's largely been ignored for the last several years. In the ramp up to the elections, the Nigerian government really made a major investment in
Nigerian president's a guy named Good Luck Jonathan.
Well, Good Luck's luck ran out, and so he's the former president.
Former president. Yeah.
That's a good one. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, basically, some people sort of castigated him for this, but if you were going to disparage the effort, you would say that it was an election ploy. And some people viewed one of the pivotal election issues was whether he had done enough against Boko Haram. Most of the public sentiment was against him on that issue.
So he delayed the election, or tried to.
Hugely controversial.
In order to sort of give the offensive against Boko Haram more time to show success.
And so he said the security situation was too dire and that we couldn't hold free and fair elections in the north. And because of the presence of Boko Haram and how they had sort of devastated northern Nigeria.
Northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria, although they're one country, they're like totally different. 100% different places.
Socioeconomically, they're different. Religious,
Southern Nigeria is a functioning country.
Define functioning.
Okay.
I mean, it exists on a map. No, the major difference is that the north is very poor. Right?
Yes,
it doesn't have the natural resources, i.e., black gold, oil, that the south has.
Right. So the south has an economy.
Right. And there's also like a religious divide, right? The South is predominantly Christian, the North is predominantly Muslim, poor socioeconomic conditions. All of this made it fertile breeding ground for radical Islam to take root, which it did, and that manifested in the form of Boko Haram.
So before you get any further, let's take a look at we got a trailer of part 1, which is up. Again, part 2 coming out. I've seen all of part 1. It's incredibly dramatic. I mean, you're an embedded combat reporter. That's what's happening there. So and here's a look at part 1 of Vice News, is the war against Boko Haram.
Kill Boko Haram. If you're a Muslim, you're a target. If you're a Christian, you're a target. They slaughter people like animals.
Your wife, she
captured by Boko Haram.
Right.
I want to fight for my country. And if I die for my country, I know I die for my country.
We're going to head down that IED-laden road. So this is literally where Boko Haram started.
Yes. Most of these young men ended up killing their parents.
This isn't a practice range. The front is right there, and they're lobbing 155 high-explosive howitzer shells 13 miles downrange into enemy territory. They're staying in one line because the road's supposed to be lined with IEDs. This morning starts the invasion of Bama.
I believe when I train hard, I'll fight easy. And when you trade hard, you bleed less.
Yeah, wow. You have that long line of people that are worried about the IEDs. Who's the poor son of a bitch at the front of the line? I wouldn't want to
By the
be
way,
there.
I mean, I'm not trying to make light of this.
I was at the back of the line.
You were also drifting a little in.
I know. I had the same reaction as Ben. Get back in line. Are you crazy?
Get in line. Yeah.
I mean, I have to tell you, that part I was petrified.
Yeah.
Right? I felt like I was in like a World War I Bataan death march, like marching down the middle of the road, hundreds of soldiers, everybody. And the part that was interesting about that was the beginning of the assault of the invasion of a city called Bama, which was one of the last Boko Haram strongholds. What was so fascinating, and I didn't realize it till I got sort of boots on the ground in Nigeria, is you walked through these places where Boko Haram used to occupy, totally empty.
Yeah.
Nobody in the villages, nobody in the towns. Wow. Right, I sort of thought of it as sort of like an Afghan-like insurgency where people were still living. Like, not the case. Like these towns in northern Nigeria.
So you flee or you die.
Exactly, and that's why there's so many internally displaced people living in Maiduguri, the capital city in northern Nigeria, and places like that. But it's something that I didn't realize. I didn't expect to be walking through empty towns and villages, and it really kind of gave me like an idea of the extent of the problem.
I see it. It's in part 1 in more detail. What is that moment of the the children in this village, the young men in this village killed their families, killed their parents.
So that's sort of like the beginning of the insurgency of Boko Haram, like the genesis, its roots there in Maiduguri, under a guy named Muhammad Yusuf.
Who is dead now.
He is dead. He was killed by Nigerian security forces, and sort of the law of unintended consequences of killing.
Number two was worse.
Way worse.
Yeah.
Shekau is this radical, and you can look on the internet and see lots of videos of him personally beheading people and all of this stuff. And that's when the insurgency really took off.
Is it working at all? Are they making any headway? And then the follow-up question would be: are these guys as horrendous as they seem? Do they have a point? Do they have an end game, or do they think the end game is the end times?
Yeah. I mean, when I was there, they partnered, to answer your second question first, they partnered with ISIS, right? There was sort of a big public display. That didn't mean that much sort of tactically. It sort of had more symbolic significance. Yeah. But the end game for them is not that distinct from ISIS, right? They want to establish an Islamic caliphate in northern Nigeria. Will they be able to do that? No. Certainly not after this current push by the Nigerians and the multinational force that includes the Chadian forces and the Cameroonian forces. So, no. Basically, in essence, if you take a snapshot in time of where we are now, what the Nigerian army did is they knocked them down, and they knocked them down pretty hard. They took them from operating as what I would call a semi-conventional force, where they held territory and they had tanks and things like that. Those days are over for Boko Haram. They killed thousands of them, and the remaining fighters have now kind of scattered to the Sambisa forest area. The problem with that, while that sounds like a kinetic victory, is that they're now entering kind of a second phase of operations, which I would call like a classic counterinsurgency. Mm-hmm. So now what you're going to see is things like what I started to see towards the end of my trip there: suicide bombings, attacks. There was actually an attack yesterday where they killed 24, they killed 72 Chadian forces.
You were in a market shopping, you bought food, 2 days later, that market bombed.
54 people killed.
2 days after you were there.
Right.
Jesus.
So I think that is what the future of, or the near-term future of northern Nigeria looks like. Familiar to us because we've seen it in other parts of the world. I will say that while the Nigerians did a very good job in the sort of conventional component of this conflict, I think it's going to be much more difficult for them to fight this insurgency. I don't think they're equipped or trained as a counterinsurgency force.
Yeah, I think that once you get into counterinsurgency, as we saw in Iraq, you get into a different kind of animal, and that is enormously hard to fight, and it takes a ton of smart, strategic decisions and a little bit of luck to, and mainly you got to get the people of that region on your side, so that they push the insurgents out, right?
Right.
And so I don't know, and we'll end it on this. Do you think the Nigerian government is sophisticated enough to be able to go in there and win the local support of northern Nigerians and uproot the insurgency that way?
I don't know the answer to that question. Mm-hmm. Even this portion of the conflict, which I think we can all agree on, was sort of easier to implement. Send a bunch of tanks and guys out there to kill people. Even that portion, it took an election year cycle to get the impetus and the will to make that happen. Whether there's the will and the desire to do a long-term sustained counterinsurgency force and the non-sexy things like socioeconomic development in the area, that's an unknown question.